So, The Witcher Season 3 is here, and I really want to preface this with the fact that I did not expect much out of this coming into it. I was very trepidatious. It was like approaching a lover who had cheated on you, and they just want it, they're knocking on your door, they just want to come back in one last time. And as it turns out, it was the best night you ever have. In fact, I actually think, and this is going to go against the grain, I think The Witcher Season 3, at least what I've seen so far, the first 5 episodes released, are great. You know, there's multiple things going against The Witcher right now. First and foremost, if you've been living under a rock, of course, the amazing Henry Cavill, who people were highly doubtful would be a great Witcher, of course turned out to be the best thing in the show, has announced that he's quitting the show. And despite the fact there was a couple of random tweets from unsubstantiated sources that he was a bad guy and a gamer and he was mean to ladies, all those tweets got deleted. Turns out they were all lies, and the truth eventually bubbled to the surface that, in fact, he left the show because the writers were going against the canon. They were going against what the author had originally written, and nobody wants that, right? Now, on top of this, Season 2 was not particularly good. Everybody was disenfranchised with it. The biggest reason being it kind of melded and turned into a giant, I don't know, what was it, 6, 8, 10 episode arc, as opposed to The Witcher Season 1, which had a very classy and fashionable one-episode encapsulated stories. You know, it's kind of like Xena Warrior Princess. Here's Geralt going off on his adventures. And to be honest, I think people are yearning for that these days. It harkens back to episodic television, which we lost starting in the golden age with The Sopranos, but at least The Sopranos still understood you needed to have a complete story inside of every episode. But we are long since past that, and The Witcher Season 1 was a refreshing breath of air to have that episodic format. So we lost that. Now, I've been putting a lot of thought into why it wasn't good, outside of, stale writing and just not particularly compelling. But I think the primary reason is Season 2 of The Witcher dealt entirely with Ciri. Now, if you haven't read the books or played the video game, Ciri is a huge part of it. But the fact is, when we go back to The Witcher 3, 90% of the video game, he's actually chasing Ciri. We don't actually meet Ciri. She doesn't show up until the last 95% of the game, and to be honest with you, I don't find her a particularly compelling character. Now, I have not read the books, and I am aware that she's featured prominently in a lot of books, but from my experience, every time she's on the screen, the video game, and certainly much more the show, it just doesn't work for me. I find her the least interesting person. Yes, everybody wants her blood, or to marry her, or whatever else. She's amazing, she's magical, she's the fated child.
Well, I've made up my mind. This Cyrilla nonsense is just too much of a headache. I couldn't agree more, Your Majesty.
She herself feels like she's destined for great things, but I just could care less. It's not interesting to me, and I think that shined through. I think she's probably the weakest link in this show, and she still is kind of the weakest link in Season 3. Now, I just mentioned the video game, and of course especially The Witcher 3. I think a huge portion of the male Witcher audience got into this show, got into the lore from playing or watching playthroughs of The Witcher 3. And I should note for anybody watching this right now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about and your wife's leaving you, you need something to do with your life, go onto YouTube and search for Witcher 3 cutscene movie, because I'll tell you, I have never played a second of that game, but I've watched every scene in that game. It's like an interactive 12-hour movie, and it is wonderfully written and interesting and entertaining, and the expansions as well. It's just a great time. Now, I did just mention the male audience, which leads me to the future of The Witcher 3. I can tell you right now, despite the fact I think this season is fabulous, I think that the show probably has no future, because I believe that the show's popularity was very much buoyed up by a very large amount of female audience who love to watch Henry Cavill with his shirt off as the Witcher. And I have evidence of this because I actually watched the first episode with my sister, who absolutely hated it, but didn't want to turn it off because Henry Cavill was hot. So the loss of him is quite a loss to the show. I think it's going to be almost impossible for there to be a Season 5, though it has been told to us there is going to be a Season 4. Now, all that being said, one last important thing, which I probably should have put towards the beginning of this little show I've made. The first episode is bad. And that's why my sister was impatient, and I myself was kind of impatient. The first episode of this new season 3 is not great. I think that's for two reasons. One, they're wrapping up a lot of crappy loose ends from the second season. It's the dream team. It's Geralt, Ciri, and of course his bae Yennefer. And when all three of them are on the screen at the same time, it's probably going to suck. But so they're wrapping up everything. They're eventually separating, which, my God, is a good thing. And then at the same time, I think the entire audience is kind of playing catch up with where we left off. We've kind of erased season 2 from our minds if we've even watched it at all. Which, by the way, reminds me, you don't need to watch season 2 of The Witcher to enjoy this. In fact, you might as well just skip from season 1 to season 3. Kind of similar reflections, I think, to The Mandalorian. You're basically left off exactly where they left at season 1. In fact, it's as if season 2 didn't even happen. Though there were some interesting and good parts of season 2, for the most part, it was underwhelming. The other issue I had was, of course, I had to play catch-up, which while I think season 1, while it's bad in and of itself, I'm still trying to figure out what the hell is going on. I think it would have been very useful for them to have a giant map and kind of set the stage, as it were, because the whole time I kept thinking, okay, wait a minute, so it's like Nilfgaard, and he's here, and this kingdom's there, and what was that person again? In fact, the Emperor, and I can't even remember what country it was, I think it is Nilfgaard, I thought this guy and this guy were the same person, so I was super confused when he was like an emperor bragging and talking to people, and then all of a sudden he appeared to be a homeless man just a few scenes later. But that first episode ends, and then the second one begins, and it's a shame. It sucks that you have to plow through the first episode to get to the gold. But I'll tell you right now, by the time we were midway through the second episode, I was hooked. I was involved again. I cared about these people. The writing was good. The dialogue was snappy. It was clever. It was not underestimating your intelligence. And from episode 2 to 5, I absolutely had a phenomenal time, and I can't recommend it enough. In terms of a brief plot synopsis, there's not much to say here. The backbone of the show is, once again, Ciri, gotta get Ciri, gotta hide Ciri, gotta protect Ciri.
But I've made up my mind. This Ritter nonsense is just too much of a headache.
But thankfully, that does take kind of a backseat, and we give breathing room for everybody to have really wonderful scenes together. And there are wonderful scenes here. And once again, going back to the dialogue, it's very clever, it's very well written, and I cannot say it enough, it doesn't underestimate your intelligence. Someone actually brought out a dictionary for this show and decided to use some advanced words. And those who understand, it's great, and those who don't, they learn a little something. So I really enjoyed. I'll have to look up who was writing this show because the scenes are fresh, they're cracking, and they keep you well engaged. The format of the show follows a little more closely to the first season. There's kind of a monster of the week when it comes to the episodes, which really leads, I think it was episode 2, there's a very disturbing, awesome monster. The other two, of course, Geralt fights, a little more common, a little more mundane, but it makes for a fun time. Though this does just now remind me once again of the weakness of the first episode, where Ciri, hiding from the law, goes to a big party in the middle of the town square, and for some reason, none of them have decided to use different names for each other. So, of course, the second she goes missing, he runs around and screams Ciri at the top of his lungs for the entire city to hear, which doesn't seem good for people on the run for their lives with the entire country hunting them. Of course, in terms of the cast, we have Geralt coming back in full force, Henry Cavill, and God bless this man's integrity, because even if the entire filming of this season, he hated the writers, he hated the directors, he was on his way out, he doesn't pull any punches, and he puts his all into it. And he, once again, as always, has embodied the spirit of Geralt. Steals every scene he's in. He's just wonderful to watch, and I'm so sorry for all the ladies out there, and of course the men, that he will not be showing up in Season 4. Anya Charlotra as the beautiful Yennefer. Once again, I often sometimes wonder if her beauty simply outseeds her acting talents, though I can't deny whenever she's on the screen, she's very much worth looking at. Though that does bring me back to when she played the Hunchback in the first season, and I think she played it very well. So she's a good actress, though most of her scenes in this third season involve her and Ciri buddying up. So automatically, you know they're not going to be the strongest part of the show, which of course leads to Freya Allen playing Ciri, who once again does the best she can with what's written. And as the episodes roll on, there's actually some really nice character building scenes. One that sticks out in my mind is a very cute scene where she and Jaskier, our resident bard, are spying on Geralt and Yennefer having a little lover's quarrel, and they're actually pantomiming and whispering the lines that they think are coming out of their mouths, which of course is very accurate and probably is what's coming out of their mouths. It's a very cute scene, and I think it puts a lot more of a humanizing aspect on her character, and they managed to pepper a few of those in there throughout the season, though I still ultimately think she is the worst part of the show. Speaking of Jaskier, he's back. He's in fine style. Everybody loves him. He's got some wonderfully sarcastic dialogue. He does have a thing going on here with an enemy prince of one of the other nations that's not Nilfgaard. Special mention to the guy playing that prince. When he initially shows up, it's quite creepy. It's a kind of an unpredictable menace where he absolutely does not care about anything going on around him, but it seems clear that he knows and understands more that he's letting on. Unfortunately, this kind of transforms into a bit of a interview with the vampire-esque relationship between two beautiful men. My disappointment mainly stems from the fact that I thought the prince was a lot more interesting as kind of an unpredictable badass, but it's cute, it's decent, it's okay. Rounding off the special mentions, because there's about 50 characters in this show, and I'm not going to cover all of them certainly, Fringilla, which is the wonderful sorceress who, like everything else I mainly remember from Season 1, shows up in kind of a drunken prison, and even though her parts are small, she actually manages to capture the screen a little bit, and they're interesting. And last but not least, the wonderful Tisea, who's played by Mayana Burning, really I think is the backbone and the soul of the show. She plays her role so well, she's caring, she's serious, and every time she shows up on the screen, you just get a little comfort feeling. You know she's a good person. In fact, I think it'd be wonderful if at the end of the season there was a twist and it turns out she's totally evil, because that would be very upsetting for me. But not to worry, spoiler free, that has not happened yet, and if it happens in the books, I haven't read the books, and if you have, well, then you spoiled yourself. The sets and the visuals are an interesting subject because I think, once again, the first episode stands out as not being particularly impressive. I think the sets can be a little cheap, but most of the time they're filmed with the right angles and the right lighting to make them look good. One of the things I specifically wanted to point out, though, and that I really, really liked about the show, is for the vast majority of the scenes, they really take the time to add to the world around them. For me, it's what I call layers. They're adding layers to the story. When you have a scene that's just two guys talking, sometimes it can be good. You go back to Star Trek, sometimes you want to focus on the characters. But for most of the scenes in the show, it's two characters talking, and there's something going on around them which builds more realism into the world. A specific example, there's a scene with the king, and he's playing some kind of racquetball game. It's like a giant metal bowl, and he's shooting it across with a lacrosse stick and probably injuring the guy on the other side. And it makes you think, it makes you wonder, is this a real game? How do they play it? And the whole scene, if left just by itself, could have been a boring, forgettable scene, but it makes it memorable and it makes it interesting. And it reminds me of the third Harry Potter movie, the one that's actually good. And I think one of the big things that made that movie a standout was every scene they took the time to add little magic touches to the world that showed you were in the wizarding world. So I think the show does the same thing here. I think there's a remarkable amount of effort put into the scenes and the settings to make them more believable. And the journey we're taking through Middle-earth is that much better for it. One last highlight I wanted to talk about is the penultimate 5th episode that was initially released revolves around this giant wizard party, which is very exciting off the bat because it's obviously going to be filled with sex lies and videotapes and all kinds of Game of Thrones-like deceptions and backstabbing. You just know it. And it starts off very classy. They even have the requisite introduction to the major players.
And that's Benjamin Guggenheim and his mistress, Madame Aubert. Mrs. Guggenheim is at home with the children, of course. And over here we have Sir Cosmo and Lucille Lady Duff Gordon. She designs naughty lingerie, among her many talents.
Over there, we have Sabrina Glevisig and Marty Sodergren. They're passionate. By the fountain.
And the entire episode revolves around going back to the party and seeing scenes and conversations that you didn't see. And in fact, things that happened during the party weren't as they appeared to. And while initially our first run around, you can tell things quite weren't what they appeared to be, as it proceeds, it actually becomes a really entertaining episode. And it made me think that had they just simply strung all these scenes together for this giant party, it might well have been quite boring. So you've got a clever editor there who decided to turn this episode into something more and into something interesting. So big props to that. In conclusion, I think this show is well worth your time. Outside of an admittedly weak first episode, the journey you go on for the next 4 is excellent. And I really think, though I haven't seen, I probably at this point the 6th episode, maybe even the 7th has been released, I think they really would have had to drop the ball hard for the rest of this season to be bad. So as one final thought, I do not know, because I have not read the books, how closely this season is following the books. I would assume that there's definitely some inspiration there because it's excellent, but at the end of the day, I really don't care how loyal a subject is to its source material as long as it's good. And I firmly believe that The Witcher Season 3 so far has been good. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Please subscribe if you haven't, or even better, leave a comment down below. You disagree with me, you hated it, I want to know, I want to argue with you. It's fun. Otherwise, have a great day, stay safe. Oh, and I forgot to add, what a crappy, tragic waste of entertaining and interesting side characters. I mean, I guess it's great the cat was saved, but seriously, what a waste. You'll understand what I'm talking about when you see it. Bye-bye.